everyone, Happy New Year. Welcome to my 2024 purchased books audit. If you're new, what I've had the goal of for 2024 is to read every single book I buy. So I've been doing quarter check-ins every 3 months, and now that we're in 2025, it's time for me to look at the stats and reflect on my year of buying books. Now, as I go through this, I am in no way trying to encourage anyone else to do this. I have fun with the statistics. I really enjoy how this process has made me change my relationship with book buying, but if you are perfectly fine with how you acquire your books, just enjoy the statistics and my own reactions to them. So when it comes to the number of books I bought in 2024, this was not planned. I actually wish that I had recorded my reaction as I was doing the stats and counting up all of the books from my bullet journal, because my jaw dropped. It's such a satisfying number. It's big, but it's a satisfying number. I bought 100 books in 2024, which just makes the stats really easy, which I do appreciate. So the number of books that I bought after reading them, so maybe I had a NetGalley arc, a physical arc, and I wanted to support the author, or I got the book from the library first, absolutely adored it, wanted to add it to my collection. That ended up being 38 books. So 38% of the books I bought were ones I had read prior to purchasing, which leaves 62 books that I still needed to read because I bought them before I actually read them. So we're really looking at that number, 62 books. Did I accomplish it? Well, if you don't know, I ended up reading 231 books in the year of 2024. So it is possible, right? 62 of those could have been books that I had bought in 2024. I'm gonna tell you I didn't. Maybe I'm a terrible creator because I'm not, providing you with suspense. I'm just telling you outright, I failed my goal of trying to read every single book in 2024. But you know what? It's okay, because past Leandra didn't give me any punishments. I didn't have any type of repercussions for not doing it beyond the fact that I, obviously didn't keep my physically owned shelves that I had to read any lower, because that was my biggest worry, is that every single year I kept buying books and that added to my physically owned TBR, but I wasn't taking books off the shelves enough. So the number just keeps growing and growing, which again, works for some people. But for me, I live in a studio apartment. I do not have the space. And so I was like, okay, if I can just limit the number of books I'm adding to my physically owned TBR, I think it'll be okay. So with the 62 books that I ended up buying and needed to read in order to accomplish my goal, which we know I failed, I actually ended up reading 43 of them. So 43 out of the 62 books that I needed to read, I accomplished. However, that left 19 unread or unfinished, because when we really break it down, what happened was I had 16 books unread. So 16 books I'd never touched. I didn't have a plan for them. 2 books are actually books I'm currently reading. I am still counting them in the statistic of having not read them before 2025 arrived, but I think it's important to note that 2 are ones I'm currently reading. And then I have 1 that I actually had to put to the side. I couldn't pick it up because I'm reading it for Not Reading for Content Book Club, the podcast that I have with Danny Dabbles. That is the Hitchcock Hotel. We're gonna be reading it for our horror mystery genre blend, the final book of the first season for genre blends for the podcast. So if you guys are interested, join us in April when we read that book. So not terrible, 19 books left from 2024. That means that 38 plus the 43, so where am I getting the statistic? 38 books that I read prior to purchasing, 43 that I read after purchasing, means I read 81 out of the 100 books I bought. 81%? I mean, it's not terrible, especially when this is the first year that I really dedicated myself to that goal. Would I have liked to say 100 out of 100? Of course. I mean, because of Not Reading for Content, it would have had to be 99 out of 100, but you know what I mean. And I'm really not mad at that. I definitely still plan to prioritize those 19 books going into 2025, and I'm renewing my goal. I want to try this again. This time I have included some additions, some challenges, rewards, and punishments. If you want to hear about them, you can check out my 2025 goals, because that's not part of these statistics. So I may not have provided suspense for if I accomplish this goal, but I am going to provide suspense for what the rewards and punishments are. But let's move on to some additional interesting numbers. Looking at the 62 books that I bought prior to reading, 5 were DNFs, which is a bit unfortunate. 2 of them are soft DNFs, so I'm willing to pick them back up again. It was The Queen of Poisons, as well as Jekyll and Hyde Consulting Detectives. I just realized that something was happening in the narrative that I wasn't really liking. I felt as though I was forcing myself to keep reading. I don't want to hard DNF. I don't want to fully put these books down. So I'm not mad at the idea that I only had 3 official DNFs. And really, 2 of them were a part of a series DNF. I ended up deciding to read Chestnut Springs for 2024 with a few friends. I really don't know what any of us were thinking having me join in this venture. I read the first 3 books, which I purchased, and I also purchased books 4 and 5, but by book 3, I was like, what am I doing? I should not be reading this series. I'm having the worst time. I did an entire video on it. So I elected to DNF the series, meaning that I DNF'd the last 2 books I didn't even pick up. So those are a part of that number as well. The other DNF that I ended up having was actually one of my first purchases of the year. I bought it back in February, The Cursed Rose. It was the 3rd book in the Bone Spindle series by Leslie Vedder. And all year, I could not bring myself to pick this up. I'm really glad I supported the author because it's YA, it's queer, it's a fairy tale retelling. I know a lot of people could really enjoy it. And I think that those who this series is made for aren't really finding it, but I don't think that I'm really interested in reading YA anymore, or it's really tough. I think throughout the year, I found out, according to my bullet journal, I only read 10 YA books. Thinking back, I've read 231 books total this year, and only 10 were YA. So it shows that the series really wasn't for me. So what I'm gonna do for that one specifically, the others I sold on Pango because I was like, I need to get some of my money back, specifically for Chestnut Springs. For The Cursed Rose, I owned the other 2 books in the series. I'm just gonna donate the entire trilogy to the library where I work so that other YA readers can access it, because the series isn't in my district. It's not in, our library system yet. I think that ends up working out really well. And this acts as a really great segue. I did have 4 unhauls. 2 of those are the Chestnut Springs books that I didn't even touch. One of them was actually a book that arrived a bit damaged. It was kind of expensive, so I didn't even read it. I just returned it. That was The Mousetrap by Agatha Christie, because it hit its 70th year, I think, anniversary. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. And then the 4th unhaul is The Cursed Rose. I haven't actually donated it to my library yet because I'm also in a different location, by the way, friends. I'm visiting family right now for the holidays. So I will when I get back home. And then we have the question of, how many books do I actually regret buying? I would say 11-ish, because there are some that I didn't absolutely hate, a couple that were maybe 3-star range. And I'm kind of like, do I regret buying those? I did enjoy it, but I didn't really need to spend the money on it. I could have borrowed these from the library. So I do think that 11 is probably the right number for that. So 11% of the books I bought this year I regret buying. I wish it was lower. I always wish it was lower, but I'm not mad at that number. A 10%, amount is actually like probably okay. Like, I'm not mad at that. I think that there are some trends within the books that I've neglected to read, which are pretty fascinating. So 5 books are from the Golden Age. For those who don't know what the Golden Age of detective fiction is, typically we like to zero in on the 1920s, the 1930s, but in reality, the 1920s was when mysteries were really amping up, as far as, say, like Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, and the lot. But it can, be extended into the 1940s, 1950s, whatever. But yeah, the first 5 books of the year that I hadn't read, so like January through April, all 5 of those were Golden Age detective fiction books. And I really didn't buy too many after that, mainly because I had access to the library. I owned the Golden Age books that I was reading. So, it actually isn't that terrible. It's interesting that, 5 of these 19 books are Golden Age. Then I also had 3 nonfiction. I'm pretty sure I only bought 3 nonfiction this year. So the fact that I didn't read any of them tells you that that's something I need to work on. I did read a couple nonfiction books from my physically owned TBR, at least 2, because I ended up reading the Bill Bryson book. What is that called? A Walk in the Woods. And then I also ended up reading Life Among the Savages by Shirley Jackson with Carly, Bookish Pixie Reads. So that's kind of interesting that I added 3 nonfiction to my TBR, but I did read, to my memory, 2 from my, backlist. But I need to work on that. And then finally, there were 5 books that I bought for Battle of the Booktuber Reconnaissance. And let me see here. Yeah, I'm currently reading 2 of them, and there were 3 that I just didn't get to. So kind of silly of me. I bought them thinking, oh, I'm gonna read them right away, and then I didn't. Those of you who don't know what Battle of the Booktuber is, it is actually a competition that by its close will have lasted about a year and a half. We had our first 4 rounds in 2024. I was in round 1, and now the championship round is gonna be in the summer of 2025. Within, the last week, we've all received our recommendations, and I'm very excited, but I have to keep it all, hush hush. So it's really interesting that 5 Battle of the Booktuber Reconnaissance, 5 Golden Age, and then 3 nonfiction. That in itself is 13 out of the 19 books I ended up reading. So when you break it down, it actually explains a lot. Plus, at the end of the year, I was really busy doing research for Battle of the Booktuber. I also was doing my Murder Miss vlog project, which ended up taking 4 vlogs. I read, I think, 14 or 15 books from my owned TBR, and it ended up being such a bigger project than I expected. And if we took those 15 books away and actually inserted the 19 books that I needed to read from my, purchased books of 2024, it explains why I didn't get to them. And I'm pretty happy with it, because actually the 15 books that I read from my physically owned TBR just got replaced. So if anything, I plan in the next couple weeks to do a complete, video showing every single book from my physically owned TBR. I think it'll show that the numbers, I'm crossing my fingers, should be lower than last year's video. I think last year's video was 402 or something like that, and I think I must be under 400, right? I mean, the numbers, I only added 19 books to my, actually that's a great, okay, hold on. So actually, I know for a fact how many books I read from my physical owned TBR this year. It was 28. I know it's not many. I know. I relied on NetGalley and the library so much. But so if I read 28 from my physically owned TBR, I have 19 left over from my 2024 purchased reads. Then that in itself shows that I've lowered my physical TBR. And I'm also not even counting DNFs, because I DNF'd a handful of books from my physically owned TBR too. We're not going to get into it. It's sad, but it happens. This has been a really interesting 12-month project, me trying to see what my purchasing habits are. Would I prevent myself actually? Did the challenge prevent me from buying more books? I do think it did, and not in a bad way, where I realized, okay, looking at these books, do I want to buy them? Am I going to read it soon? No. So why am I buying it now? And so then I would wait, and there would be some titles that I would eventually buy by the end of 2024, but there were others that I end up having access to through Libby or some other form. And yeah, I think it actually just made me a more conscientious buyer, and it 100% prevented me from buying more books than I would have. I'm really excited to see what 2025 holds, especially when it comes to my buying habits. I feel more confident with every passing year as I kind of become a bit more serious with the idea of tracking the books I bought. Full transparency, 2024 wasn't the first time I tried to read every single book I bought, or at least put the idea in my head. I had the idea first in 2023, but I just didn't actually put any effort into it. I wasn't diligent. And so at the end of 2023, I realized I had bought so many books. It was insane. So then I was like, okay, Leandra, you've had the idea floating around in your brain for a year, didn't do anything about it, and now in 2024, you're going to actually be serious. And here we are. I'm really happy with it. The fact that, again, 81% of the books I bought in 2025 are read. Whether they were read prior to purchasing or read after purchasing, I'm really happy with that number. And I'm, accepting the challenge of coming back to you in 1 year with even better statistics. Thank you all so much for getting to the end. I hope that you found it really interesting, me discussing all of these books. If there were any statistics or questions that you had, I didn't answer. For instance, I realized I didn't really go in depth discussing, the authors I bought, if there were any authors that I repeat bought, those types of situations, or if there were any books that I definitely plan on buying in 2025. None of that came to me until just now. So feel free to ask me in the comments. We can have a discussion. If you happen to know how many books you read in 2024 from your purchase TBR, I'd love to hear it. Or let me know your own kind of habits or strategies or your own philosophy when it comes to buying books and adding, lovely books to your collection. If you're not feeling chatty, feel free to include, either dollar sign emojis, book stacks, numbers. How there's like that little graph? That's really fun. We never get to see that one. And also, thank you so much to my Manor guests. I remain grateful, whether you are a sleuth, a witness, a suspect, or an ice cold corpse. Also, if you wanted to see my other stats during quarter 1, 2, and 3, I will have quarter 1 linked up here. Feel free to check it out. Thank you all so much. I really do appreciate you. I hope you have a lovely new year, and I do also hope to see you in the next one. Bye.
None of that came to me until just now.